Welcome back to CBC News Network. I'm Chris Glover. We're continuing to track developments this morning on the war in Ukraine. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy spoke from the G7 today in Hiroshima, Japan, about the battle for Bakhmut. Zelenskyy rejected claims from Moscow that the city had fallen to the Russians. A Ukrainian general says Kyiv's forces still hold a, quote, insignificant part of the city, and says Ukrainian troops are advancing on Russian fighters from the outskirts of Bakhmut. Here's some of what Zelenskyy had to say about where things stand on the ground.
Now our people are accomplishing a very important mission. They are now in Bakhmut. I will not share where exactly, but it witnesses that Bakhmut is not occupied by Russian Federation as of today. There are no 2 or 3 interpretations of those words.
All right, so the Russians say they've got it. The Ukrainian president there saying not so fast. So there's a lot to unpack here. And for more, I want to shift things over to Elliot Ackerman. He is a former U.S. Marine, and he's also an author and writer for The Atlantic, joining us this morning from New York City. Hi there. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So we're hearing these conflicting reports over control of Bakhmut in the middle of a war as kind of messy and confusing as this one has been right from the beginning. I mean, what's your take on these kind of differing storylines?
Well, I think we have to have some patience to see exactly what is going on in Bakhmut. But I think it's important to remember that before the war, Bakhmut was a city of about 70,000 inhabitants. It is one that even the Russians will concede holds no real strategic importance in and of itself, but the battle has become symbolic for who is going to retain the initiative in this war in Ukraine. And the Ukrainians have really used Bakhmut as a sinkhole in which to cause Russians enormous casualties as they've been defending the city these many months.
Well, and we know that Zelenskyy was there at the G7. We just saw that clip of him there speaking, and he was meeting one-on-one with all of these Western leaders. Obviously, he's trying to drum up more support, both diplomatically and also with his war effort in terms of actually getting more aid, more military support as well. But how important was his discussions there, Zelenskyy's discussions with other leaders outside of those kind of core group of supporters? I'm thinking like countries like India and Brazil, for example.
Well, those are very important discussions because, you know, those are nations that can very much become economic enablers for the Russians if they're willing to, in particular, continue to buy Russian oil that allows Putin to perpetuate the war. So it's also, I think, important to remember the context under which all of this is happening. The Ukrainians are preparing for what has long been telegraphed as a pretty extensive counteroffensive. So this Russian claim for Bakhmut comes probably in the weeks before that counteroffensive begins. And that counteroffensive will happen more than a year into this war. And it's very important that the Ukrainians demonstrate success in these months ahead as they now go from the defense to offense against the Russians.